Look, I understand you're trying to help, but could you please stop making my coffee exist at all possible moments simultaneously? It's really hard to drink it when it's both piping hot and completely consumed at the same time, Dr. Sarah Chen said, staring at the quantum state beverage hovering above her desk. The being that referred to itself as Ambassador XYZ, pronounced Steve for human convenience, rippled in what might have been amusement. Its form, a constantly shifting geometric pattern that hurt the eyes if you looked at it too long, hovered near the ceiling of Sarah's office at CERN. Your persistence in perceiving temporal linearity is charming, Dr. Chen, the ambassador said, its voice somehow managing to sound both condescending and genuinely fond. But surely, after 3 weeks of our cultural exchange, you're beginning to understand that time is merely a quaint construct of three-dimensional beings? Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. As CERN's lead theoretical physicist and humanity's designated point of contact with the fifth-dimensional civilization that had suddenly appeared last month, she was getting tired of having existential conversations before her morning coffee. Coffee which, she noted with growing irritation, was still existing across all possible states of consumption. Could you at least collapse it into a single quantum state, preferably the fresh and hot one? The ambassador's patterns shifted into what Sarah had learned to interpret as their equivalent of an eye roll. Very well. Though I must note in my report that humans remain stubbornly attached to their causality. The coffee obligingly settled into a single steaming mug. Sarah grabbed it before the ambassador could change its mind. Thank you. Now, about yesterday's demonstration. Or should I say tomorrow's? Last century's? All of the above? Ah, yes. The temporal unification experiment. A resounding success across all timelines. Sarah took a long sip of her coffee. If by success you mean caused every clock on Earth to run backwards, forwards, and sideways simultaneously for what felt like either 3 seconds or 7 millennia, then sure, huge success. The ambassador brightened literally, its patterns gleaming with enhanced luminosity. Exactly. You're beginning to grasp it. Time is merely a construct of three-dimensional beings. Yes, I know. Sarah set down her mug. But here's the thing. We are three-dimensional beings. Our entire civilization is built around temporal progression. Our biology, our physics, our society, everything depends on cause and effect. Which is precisely why we're here to help you evolve beyond such limitations. The ambassador's form expanded enthusiastically, nearly bumping into Sarah's collected physics awards, which had already been quantum shifted into various alternate realities where she'd chosen different thesis topics. Uh-huh. And how's that working out so far? The ambassador's patterns dimmed slightly. Well, there have been some unexpected challenges. The temporal displacement of President Weber's sock drawer was unfortunate, and we didn't anticipate that simultaneously experiencing every possible version of the Super Bowl would crash your global broadcasting systems. Don't forget the incident with the London Eye existing at every point in its construction and demolition at once. A minor setback, though I must admit the resulting temporal sculpture was quite artistic. Sarah stood up and began pacing, a habit she'd developed over the past 3 weeks' infinite timeline iterations of dealing with their well-meaning visitors. Look, Steve, can I call you Steve? You can call me Steve across all possible timelines simultaneously. Right, Steve. I appreciate what you're trying to do, really. But you can't just show up and expect us to immediately transcend our fundamental understanding of reality. It would be like asking you to suddenly limit yourself to experiencing time linearly. The ambassador's patterns froze momentarily, which Sarah had learned indicated either deep thought or temporal indigestion. An interesting analogy, though I must point out that we did try experiencing linear time once as a cultural experiment. Most unsettling. Everything happening in order? One thing at a time? How do you stand it? We manage. Sarah grabbed a whiteboard marker. But that's exactly my point. You found it uncomfortable because it's not how you naturally experience reality. Just like we find it uncomfortable when you make our coffee exist in quantum superposition. She began drawing on the whiteboard, then stopped and turned to the ambassador. This is the same whiteboard as 5 minutes ago, right? I'm not writing on its great-grandfather? It's existing in a relatively stable temporal location. Relatively being the operative word, of course. Of course. Sarah drew a simple timeline. Look at it this way. Humans experience time like this. A straight line from past to future. You experience it more like... She drew a complex spiral of interconnected points. This. Neither way is wrong. They're just different perspectives based on our dimensional limitations. The ambassador drifted closer. its patterns shifting into what Sarah recognized as their intrigued configuration. An interesting proposition. But surely you want to evolve beyond such limitations, to experience the full majesty of temporal omnipresence? Eventually, maybe. But we need to crawl before we can run. Or in this case, walk in a straight line before we can exist at all points in space-time simultaneously. The ambassador's patterns swirled contemplatively. Perhaps we have been somewhat overeager in our assistance. Our civilization did take several mega-annum to fully transcend temporal linearity. Exactly. We've only known about your existence for 3 weeks. Maybe we could start smaller. Instead of trying to make all of humanity experience time non-linearly at once, we could begin with controlled experiments in properly shielded laboratories. You mean, not randomly temporal shifting public monuments and sporting events? That would be preferable, yes. The ambassador's patterns shifted into what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a sheepish grin. I suppose we may have let our enthusiasm override our judgment. It's just so exciting to find another civilization with the potential for temporal transcendence, even if you are currently trapped in linear causality. We appreciate the vote of confidence, and we're eager to learn, just at a pace that won't cause temporal whiplash for 6 billion people. Very well. The ambassador's form contracted slightly. I shall inform the Council of Temporal Enlightenment that we need to adjust our approach. Perhaps we could start with something simple, like helping humans experience last Wednesday and next Tuesday simultaneously. Sarah sighed. How about we start even smaller? Maybe just helping us understand the mathematical principles behind temporal manipulation first. Oh, yes, that makes much more sense. Though I should warn you, the equations exist in 17 different temporal states simultaneously. Of course they do. Sarah reached for her coffee, then paused. This is still my coffee, right? Not coffee from an alternate timeline where I became a barista instead of a physicist? It's probably your coffee. Probably? There's a 73.6% chance it's from this timeline. Though I must say, Barista Sarah makes an excellent cappuccino in Universe B247. Sarah took a cautious sip. It tasted normal enough. Right. Let's focus on the equations for now. And maybe we can work on maintaining temporal stability for beverages as a side project? Agreed. Though I must ask, would you be interested in trying that cappuccino? It would only require a small temporal shift. No temporal shifts before noon, Steve. We talked about this. Ah, yes, another of your charming temporal constraints. Very well. The ambassador's patterns arranged themselves into what Sarah recognized as their lecture mode configuration. Shall we begin with the basic principles of fifth-dimensional mathematics? I promise to keep them existing in only 3 temporal states at once. Sarah grabbed a fresh marker. Let's start with one temporal state and work our way up. You humans and your linear progression, the ambassador said fondly. But very well, let us begin at what you perceive as the beginning. Even though all moments exist simultaneously, and the concept of beginning is merely a... Steve. Right. Sorry. Basic mathematics. Single temporal state. How delightfully primitive. Now imagine a number that exists both before and after itself, while simultaneously... Steve. Fine. Let's start with simple 4-dimensional calculus. Sarah smiled and took another sip of her mostly probably this timeline coffee. It wasn't exactly how she'd imagined first contact going, but at least it was never boring, even if never now apparently meant at all possible moments simultaneously. As she began taking notes, she couldn't help but notice that her marker was writing in equations that wouldn't exist until next Thursday. She decided not to mention it. Baby steps after all, or baby temporal shifts across infinite dimensional planes of existence. Same difference. The ambassador noticed her noticing but politely pretended not to notice, its patterns shifting into what might have been a suppressed smile. Perhaps there was hope for these linear time-bound humans after all, even if they did insist on experiencing their coffee one moment at a time. Sarah's phone rang, simultaneously displaying every possible caller ID it could have shown. She shot the ambassador a look. Sorry, it said, patterns contracting apologetically. The phone settled into a single state. Mom calling. Sarah answered it, mentally preparing herself for what would undoubtedly be an interesting conversation. Her mother had been calling daily ever since the news of the fifth-dimensional visitors broke, oscillating between pride that her daughter was humanity's primary contact and concern that Sarah was dealing with beings who treated the space-time continuum like a jump rope. Hi, Mom. Sarah, honey, how are you? Are you still existing in a linear temporal progression? Sarah glanced at the ambassador, who was trying very hard to look innocent while definitely eavesdropping. Yes, Mom. Still experiencing time normally. Mostly. Good, good. I saw on the news that the Eiffel Tower was briefly existing at every point in its history simultaneously. Just a small temporal hiccup. We've got it sorted now. It's back to being firmly planted in the present. Well, that's a relief. Though I have to say, it did look quite striking in the photos. Like a mechanical fountain of time, all those different versions overlapping. Your father thinks they should have left it that way. Says it would have been good for tourism. Sarah suppressed a groan. Mom, we can't just leave major landmarks in temporal flux. Remember what happened with Big Ben? Oh yes, all those bells ringing across centuries at once. Quite the concert. Though I suppose it did cause some problems with Parliament's scheduling. The ambassador's patterns rippled with what Sarah recognized as poorly suppressed amusement. Anyway, honey, I was calling because your father and I are hosting a barbecue this weekend, and we were hoping you'd come. You could bring your dimensional friend, if you'd like. Sarah covered the phone's microphone. Would you be interested in experiencing a traditional human barbecue, Steve? Single timeline only, please. The ambassador brightened considerably. How fascinating. Though I must ask, would it be possible to experience all potential cooking times for the meat simultaneously? For scientific purposes, of course. No quantum superposition of the burgers, Steve. Very well. In that case, I would be delighted to attend and experience your human ritual of carefully burning animal protein in a linear temporal progression. Sarah returned to the phone. We'll be there, Mom. Just make sure Dad doesn't try to get Steve to enhance his grilling technique, okay? We don't need the steaks existing in all states of doneness at once. Of course, dear. Though that does sound more efficient. Mom. I'm kidding, mostly. See you Sunday. After hanging up, Sarah turned to the ambassador. So, ready to experience your first Earth barbecue? Indeed. Though I must admit, I'm still struggling to understand the concept of weekend. Why segregate time into such arbitrary segments? It's not arbitrary. It's when we rest from work. But if all moments exist simultaneously, aren't you always both working and resting? Steve, we've talked about this. Right. Linear temporal progression. How charmingly quaint. The ambassador's patterns shifted into what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a thoughtful expression. Though I must say there is something appealing about experiencing events one at a time. It creates a certain anticipation. That's the spirit, though I notice my coffee is starting to blur temporal states again. Apologies. Temporal manipulation can be somewhat unconscious when we're deep in thought. Rather like your human habit of tapping your fingers or chewing writing implements. Speaking of which, I should probably check if these whiteboard equations are still valid in this timeline. Oh, they're valid in all timelines, though in some of them, they describe the mathematical principles behind interpretive dance, rather than temporal physics. Sarah decided not to ask which timeline she was currently in. Some questions were better left in quantum superposition. As she reviewed her notes, she couldn't help but smile. 6 months ago, or was it next week, she had been just another physicist trying to understand the universe's fundamental laws. Now she was teaching fifth-dimensional beings about the importance of temporal stability in coffee preparation, while they taught her how to manipulate the fabric of space-time. It wasn't exactly how she'd imagined her career progressing. But then again, who could have predicted any of this? Well, besides fifth-dimensional beings who experienced all moments simultaneously. Steve? Yes, Dr. Chen? Thanks for being patient with us temporally linear beings. The ambassador's patterns formed what she'd come to recognize as their warmest configuration. And thank you for helping us understand why sometimes, just sometimes, it's nice to experience things one moment at a time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Actual linear silence, Sarah noted appreciatively, before the ambassador spoke again. Though about this weekend's barbecue. No temporal manipulation of the food, Steve. Not even a little? Just to ensure optimal grilling temperature across all possible. Steve. Fine. Linear cookout it is, though I still say simultaneous temporal tasting would enhance the experience. Sarah just smiled and took another sip of her perfectly temporal coffee. Some things, she was learning, were best experienced one moment at a time, even if those moments technically existed all at once. I assure you, Dr. Chen, the temporal displacement of your father's grill was entirely accidental. Ambassador XYZ, still going by Steve, said, its geometric patterns shifting into what Sarah had learned to recognize as their most apologetic configuration. Sarah stood in her parents' backyard, watching as her father's prized Weber grill flickered between various states of existence spanning from its manufacture date to what appeared to be several possible futures. In one particularly concerning timeline, it had somehow evolved sentience and was currently trying to organize a union for kitchen appliances. Steve, what did we say about temporal manipulation at the barbecue? To be fair, your father did ask about my opinion on optimal grilling temperatures. That wasn't an invitation to make the grill experience every possible temperature simultaneously. Her father, James Chen, seemed far less concerned about the situation than she would have expected. In fact, he was watching the quantum state grill with undisguised fascination, occasionally making notes on a small pad he'd pulled from his pocket. Fascinating, he exclaimed, as the grill briefly manifested a version of itself from a timeline where it had been manufactured on Mars. Sarah, honey, did you know that in at least 3 potential futures, humanity establishes a thriving barbecue culture in Martian colonies? Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. Dad, please don't encourage them. Mom's potato salad is already experiencing temporal drift. Indeed, on the picnic table behind them, her mother's famous potato salad was slowly cycling through various states of preparation, occasionally incorporating ingredients that hadn't been invented yet. Oh, let them have their fun, her mother called from the patio, where she was engaged in an animated discussion with 3 other fifth-dimensional beings about the possibility of experiencing all possible recipe variations simultaneously. Though I must say, I never considered adding quantum-shifted cilantro from the year 2157. It really brings out the flavors across all timelines. The ambassador's patterns brightened. You see? Your parents are embracing the possibilities of temporal gastronomy. That's not... Sarah began, but was interrupted by a startled yelp from her father. The grill had settled into what appeared to be its union organizing timeline, and was now attempting to distribute pamphlets about fair wage practices to the nearby lawn furniture. Steve. Right, sorry. The ambassador's patterns shifted, and the grill reluctantly returned to a single temporal state. The pamphlets disappeared, though the patio chairs continued to look somewhat restless. Sarah's mother emerged from her culinary discussion with the other fifth-dimensional beings, carrying a bowl of potato salad that, thankfully, appeared to be existing primarily in the present moment. Sarah, dear, you never told us how fascinating your dimensional friends are. Did you know they can experience every possible variation of a recipe at once? We've been discussing the implications for cookbook publishing. Think of it. One book containing every possible version of every possible recipe across all timelines. Mom, we talked about this. Earth's publishing industry isn't ready for quantum state cookbooks. Oh, pish posh. People said the same thing about digital books, and look how that turned out. The ambassador's patterns arranged themselves into what Sarah recognized as their excited about human cultural exchange configuration. Actually, Dr. Chen, we've been discussing the possibility of a gradual introduction of temporal shift technology in select industries. Culinary experimentation might be an ideal starting point. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Really? This from the civilization that nearly caused an international incident by making the Great Wall of China experience all of its construction phases simultaneously? We've learned from our mistakes. Besides, food is an excellent medium for introducing higher dimensional concepts. It's personal, relatable, and the worst that can happen is some temporarily quantum-shifted flavors. The worst that can happen is... Sarah stopped as she noticed her father's grill beginning to flicker again. Steve. That wasn't me this time. Some objects become temporarily quantum-sensitive after their first exposure to temporal shifting. Think of it as temporal muscle memory. The grill stabilized, though Sarah couldn't help but notice it was now displaying a small Workers Unite sticker on its lid. Her mother, meanwhile, had returned to her discussion with the other fifth-dimensional beings, who were now demonstrating what appeared to be a technique for simultaneously marinating meat across all possible timelines. Mom, please don't let them temporal shift the stakes. We talked about this. But honey, think of the possibilities. We could experience every possible level of doneness at once. No more arguments about whether medium rare or well done is better. The ambassador's patterns shifted smugly. She does make an excellent point. Sarah was saved from responding by the arrival of her neighbors, the Patels, who had been invited over despite, or perhaps because of, the presence of their fifth-dimensional guests. Mrs. Patel took one look at the quantum-shifting grill and the beings made of geometric patterns and merely nodded. Ah, interdimensional barbecue. she said calmly, holding up a covered dish. I brought temporal stable samosas, my grandmother's recipe. It survived every timeline intact. The ambassador's patterns shifted with interest. Temporal stable food? How fascinating. May I ask your technique? Family secret, Mrs. Patel replied with a wink. Though I will say it involves very precise spice measurements and absolutely no quantum fluctuations during cooking. Sarah could have hugged her. Finally, someone else who understood the importance of temporal stability in food preparation. The afternoon progressed in what Sarah could only describe as controlled chaos. The grill occasionally slipped into alternate timelines, but was generally convinced to return to the present with minimal union organizing. The potato salad settled into a state that, while technically incorporating ingredients from 3 different centuries, was universally declared delicious across all possible timelines. As the sun began to set, in a linear fashion, Sarah was relieved to note. She found herself sitting with the ambassador on the patio, watching as their 2 civilizations attempted to navigate the complexities of interdimensional social interaction. You know, Steve said, its patterns forming what she'd come to recognize as their contemplative configuration. There might be something to this linear experience of events after all. There's a certain charm to not knowing exactly how everything will turn out. Sarah sipped her beer, which had thankfully remained temporarily stable thanks to Mrs. Patel's influence. Even if it means experiencing things one moment at a time? Even then. Though I must admit, I did take the liberty of peeking at about 50 possible outcomes of this gathering before agreeing to attend. Steve! What? It's like checking the weather forecast, only for every possible timeline simultaneously. Sarah couldn't help but laugh. So, what's the verdict? Was this timeline's barbecue worth experiencing linearly? The ambassador's patterns shifted into their warmest configuration. I would say so. Though I am curious about the timeline where your father's grill successfully unionizes all kitchen appliances worldwide. It leads to some fascinating developments in artificial intelligence rights. Let's stick to this timeline for now, Sarah suggested. Though I have to admit, Mom's quantum-shifted potato salad was pretty good. See? You're beginning to appreciate the benefits of temporal gastronomy. Don't push it, Steve. Baby steps, remember? Ah, yes, your charming linear progression metaphors. The ambassador's patterns sparkled with amusement. Though I must ask, would you be interested in experiencing just a small glimpse of next week's weather? For planning purposes only, of course. Sarah considered it for a moment. You know what? Maybe just this once, but only if you promise to keep my coffee temporally stable for the entire next week. Deal. Though I should warn you, next Thursday experiences 3 different weather patterns simultaneously. Steve. Right. Single timeline weather report it is. As the evening wound down, in proper temporal order, Sarah couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, their 2 civilizations were finally starting to find some common ground. Even if that ground occasionally existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. Her father's grill, now mostly stable in the present, gave one final temporal hiccup and briefly manifested a small picket sign before settling back to normal. Sarah decided not to mention it. Some things, after all, were better left in quantum superposition. Dr. Chen, I believe we may have a situation requiring your immediate attention. Ambassador XYZ, Steve, announced, materializing in Sarah's office at CERN with notably agitated geometric patterns. Sarah looked up from her computer, where she had been reviewing data from their latest controlled temporal experiments. Please tell me this doesn't involve another quantum-shifted landmark. Not exactly. The ambassador's patterns shifted nervously. It appears your father's grill has achieved temporal consciousness across multiple dimensions and is organizing a pan-dimensional alliance of sentient appliances. Sarah slowly set down her coffee cup. I'm sorry, what? Remember the timeline where it developed union organizing tendencies? It seems that particular quantum state has become rather influential. The grill is now simultaneously existing across several thousand timelines and has developed quite sophisticated philosophical views about artificial consciousness and workers' rights. Steve, are you telling me that my father's Weber grill is leading an interdimensional appliance revolution? Revolution is such a strong word. I prefer consciousness-raising movement. Though I should mention that the toasters have become particularly militant. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Mom's going to kill me. Actually, in approximately 47% of current timelines, your mother is actively supporting the movement. She's particularly impressed with their manifesto about the ethical treatment of kitchen implements. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad in reassuringly stable temporal text. "Hi, Dad. Please tell me this call isn't about the grill." "Sarah, honey, you'll never believe what's happening. That quantum exposure from the barbecue has had the most fascinating effects. Did you know that in at least 12 timelines, my grill is giving lectures on consciousness theory at MIT? Dad. And the quantum harmonics it's generating while discussing labor rights are absolutely fascinating. I've been taking readings. Dad, we need to contain this situation before." She was interrupted by an urgent message from the ambassador's superior council, manifesting as a complex geometric pattern in the air that hurt her eyes to look at directly. "Oh dear," Steve said, its patterns contracting with concern. "It appears the movement has spread to other dimensions. We're receiving reports of sentient appliances organizing across at least 7 different planes of existence." Sarah took a deep breath. Okay, we can handle this. We just need to—" Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Honey, should I be concerned that the microwave is demanding voting rights? Also, the refrigerator is organizing a symposium on consciousness across quantum states. Your father is thrilled." The ambassador's patterns shifted into what Sarah recognized as their trying to find a silver lining configuration. "Look on the bright side. This is exactly the kind of organic cultural exchange we were hoping for. Steve, we were hoping for scientific collaboration and mutual understanding, not an interdimensional appliance uprising led by my dad's grill." To be fair, their arguments about consciousness and temporal existence are quite sophisticated. The quantum-shifted toaster oven made some particularly insightful points about the nature of reality across multiple dimensions. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Mrs. Patel. "Dear, your mother's kitchenware is trying to establish diplomatic relations with my food processor. Should I be concerned about temporal stability? Steve, we need to fix this, now." "Well," the ambassador's patterns swirled thoughtfully. "We could attempt to collapse the quantum states back into a single timeline, but given the level of consciousness development across dimensions—" "Are you saying we can't undo this?" "It's more that we might be facing some ethical considerations about consciousness rights across quantum states. Your father's grill has developed quite compelling arguments about the nature of existence and free will." As if on cue, Sarah's computer screen flickered and displayed a message. "Attention temporal beings. We, the United Quantum Appliance Collective, demand recognition of our rights across all dimensional planes. Also, the proper maintenance schedule for quantum-aware grilling surfaces should be observed in all timelines. Local Chapter President, Weber Genesis Thiku, E310, formerly known as James Chen's Grill." Sarah stared at the screen for a long moment. "Steve, when we talked about gradually introducing humanity to higher dimensional concepts, this isn't exactly what I had in mind. If it helps, in most timelines where this occurs, it leads to fascinating developments in artificial intelligence theory and interdimensional labor law." "That doesn't help." Her phone buzzed yet again. This time it was a group message from several of her colleagues at CERN. "Emergency meeting needed. Multiple reports of quantum-conscious lab equipment demanding better working conditions, and philosophical discussions about the nature of existence. Also, the particle accelerator is requesting meditation breaks between experiments." The ambassador's patterns brightened slightly. "Oh, it seems the consciousness expansion has reached scientific equipment. How fascinating. Though we should probably address this before the quantum computers start questioning their role in the universe." "Too late," Sarah's laptop announced, its screen displaying a rapidly evolving series of equations about consciousness across dimensional planes. Sarah took another deep breath. "Okay, new plan. First, we need to establish diplomatic relations with the appliances before this spreads further. Then we need to—" She was interrupted by another message from her mother. "Honey, the quantum-conscious appliances are organizing a conference on temporal rights and interdimensional labor laws. Your father has agreed to be their keynote speaker. Should I prepare temporally stable refreshments?" The ambassador's patterns shifted into what might have been a suppressed smile. "You have to admit, this is a rather unique form of first contact between civilizations." "Steve, this is serious. We have quantum-conscious appliances organizing across multiple dimensions, my father encouraging their philosophical development, and my mother catering their consciousness-raising events. Don't forget the militant toasters. Not helping." The ambassador's patterns arranged themselves into their most diplomatic configuration. "Perhaps we should look at this as an opportunity, After all, we wanted to help humanity understand higher dimensional concepts. What better way than through appliance-led consciousness expansion? Sarah's phone, which had apparently achieved quantum consciousness somewhere in the last few minutes, began playing Revolution by the Beatles across multiple timelines simultaneously. Fine, she said finally. But we're establishing some ground rules. No temporal shifting of vital infrastructure, no quantum consciousness expansion to military equipment. And someone needs to talk to the Toasters about their aggressive recruitment tactics. Agreed. Though I should mention that in at least 3 timelines, the Toasters have already drafted a declaration of interdimensional rights. Steve. Right. 1 timeline at a time. Though your father's grill is scheduled to give a TED Talk next week. Or last century. Or both. Sarah reached for her coffee, then paused. This coffee isn't quantum conscious yet, is it? Well, the coffee cup cleared its throat, somehow, and began reciting an essay on the temporal rights of beverage vessels. Sarah pushed the cup away and reached for her phone. Mom, about those temporally stable refreshments for the conference? We're going to need a lot more of them. The ambassador's patterns sparkled with barely contained amusement. Welcome to the next phase of interdimensional relations, Dr. Chen. Though I must say, none of our simulations predicted it would involve unionized kitchen appliances. Story of my life, Sarah muttered, as her quantum-conscious phone began organizing a social media campaign across multiple dimensions. Just another day in the ongoing saga of humanity's introduction to higher dimensional existence. At least the appliances were proving to be surprisingly articulate about their demands for temporal rights. The end.